Thank you, Jim. I'd first like to start acknowledge the Seminole Tribe and the Intertribal Timber Council and hosts and conference coordinators for the invite to participate in your event. I think we had a couple members go years ago, but I can't recall exactly where. But again, thanks for the invite and much appreciated. I just want to give a brief overview of what Finesse does and how we work with the communities. We are a non-profit society. We're registered as a charity, and we're governed by First Nations Board of Directors elected by the membership, and the directors are members of the First Nations communities in BC. There's roughly 207 First Nations communities in British Columbia that we work with. That changes annually due to the treaty process. Somewhere in the BC treaty process, the Chilcotin was acknowledged as a title holder in interior BC. So it kind of varies on the exact numbers. So we basically want to provide safety, education, training, and awareness in regards to community safety, whether it be flood, fire, any other emergency issue that might impact. For most of our cases in British Columbia, it's flood and fire that we've been dealing with the last few years. Finesse has been around since the early 80s. It was developed through a structural fire organization due to losses and impacts to communities as a result of houses losses and community members. And we've evolved into providing fuel management and some emergency response and planning. We have 2 office locations. The Kamloops office is where our Forest Field Management Department is housed, and North Vancouver is our Administration and Finance Department with various staff members throughout the province. So specifically our Forest Field Management Department, we're based out of Kamloops, and we're funded through the province of BC, initially through the Strategic Wildfire Prevention Initiative, now the Community Resilience Investment Program. The federal government in Canada, as Indigenous Service Canada, they support funding to our office as well to help with mitigation and wildfire management activities to our communities that we serve. We work in partnership with the province of BC, the Union of BC Municipalities, Forest Enhancement Society of BC, in the delivery of these various prevention programs. And it's been around since probably about 2005. I'll probably skim through a few of the slides just to highlight some of the impacts and barriers to prescribed burning. But one of the biggest issues back in the, 90s, going in 2000s, mountain pine beetle devastation that hit our province pretty hard. We lost that battle, and the result, it created a forest fuel problem. So they converted a lot of the funding in BC to mitigating and preventing wildfires. So we support the communities with access to those resources. I'm quite happy to say the province and the federal government has been throwing a lot of resources into our prevention mitigation programs in BC, probably over the last 20 years. So the communities have access to resources, and our office helps them navigate the criteria, guidelines, and the application process. We also work with them on education and training, and we're working with the province of BC on prescribed burning, wildland firefighting response and support. So we have a fairly strong relationship with the province of BC. And in the last 4 years, the federal government's been supporting the resources as well. So yeah, just that's kind of like primarily what our office does. We have roughly 12 staff right now with a couple contractors. So we work with them, and others stated the climate change impacts. And just a couple notes going back to, must have been the 40s, 50s when the Forest Service was born in BC. There was a change in the historic management of the forest land base with our communities, similar to what's happening in your areas. The prescribed burning ended, but the same Smokey the Bear response kind of came in. But not only that, the forest management practices in BC that were introduced really started creating some impacts to our and barriers to First Nations management of those resources within our areas of interest. And some of those resulted primarily to forest timber production was one of the main goals, suppress all wildfires. So without knowing that, that created some significant impact to the landscape. The forest stand composition began to change. We started to get impacts to mountain pine beetle, other forest health issues. So that went on for quite a few years, and with that, the result, the burning practices ended. We historically did that similar to probably your communities here. And now we're starting to feel those effects. The stands are damaged. They're thick, dense, and just thinking of the slides earlier on where in here where it may have been open, they're not open. They're thick, stagnant forest that created some severe fuel conditions, and that's resulting in some increase in our wildfires. In BC, probably the last 2 years now, we've lost on record more hectares of forest land in the last probably on record. So we've been dealing with wildfires pretty intensively over the last, since I'd say about 2003, we had some significant losses. So yeah, it's created a lot of impacts to that, and then as a result, it's impacted the environment, the soils, creating erosion, some more flooding. So I think now the trend is to try and recover from some of those losses, and I think there's a change in the mentality in the province, where I think they're realizing prescribed fire could do a lot of benefits to reduce some of those losses and impacts to the landscape. I'm not sure what the numbers of hectares were lost in last year, but they were quite significant. I think though what we're lucky in BC is we haven't had any human losses as a direct result of the fires. We had a couple helicopter accidents, but not direct fire losses. We've generally from maybe 10 structures last year. The suppression side of it is really strong, so I think that's helped out on the reducing the loss. So I want to talk about our First Nations of that project. We received some federal funding from Indigenous Service Canada 2 years ago to develop a pilot with 3 First Nations communities in the central interior part of British Columbia, the Wheaston, Bridge River, Shack and Indian Band, and the Unisatine up in the Chilcotin. It was a 2-year program, federally funded, and we just wrapped this up probably just doing the final report with Unisatine right now. So basically we interviewed some key resource personnel, whether they're elders or land managers or knowledge keepers within the communities. We sent out some interviewers, and we took back the interviews and we did analysis to locate the common themes from each of the communities. What were some of the most important things to them in regards to traditional burning practices, whether it's wildlife habitat enhancement, berry production, or medicinals access. And then we took a contemporary burn plan that the province of BC utilizes, and we went out in the field and collected the field data, and then we combined that with the First Nations knowledge into a burn plan. And that case study that we worked on is combining those 2 sets of knowledge into a burn plan that we actually implemented in March. And just some of the slides of our participants at Wheaston, our research team on the right, and our community members on the left. So we had kickoff meetings with them just to go over the process and what we would like to get out of the project and the objectives and timelines. And this is our session in Shacken. The photo on this would be your left, is the interview group from Tumuk Research in Merritt, BC. They went out and conducted most of the interviews, and one of our staff did the ones at Bridge River. So yeah, we went out, developed the interview guide, came up with a set of consistent questions, went out and conducted interviews, had our researchers, our research leads there. I'll see if this will work. Oh, I better not might blind someone. The one on the left there, Natasha Caverly and Amy Christensen, were our leads. They're PhD doctorates in BC. They helped with the interview guide and the research analysis. And then, yeah, we combined that information. Then we had a couple people that are specialized in prescribed burning, high level of fire behavior knowledge. They went out and collected the data in the field, and then we incorporated those two sets of data into a final burn plan. Some of the examples was enhancing and increasing berry production areas, access for wildlife, deer range. There's a lot of wide range of wildlife in our area, and looking at the access, pest management, of course, the wildfire prevention, and increase our medicinals. One thing we've applied back to the federal government to go back into those areas to see what impacts the burns that we did do on those objectives and values. So that will happen in phase 2. We're going to develop a post-fire, I guess, analysis guide to see what effectiveness we may have had. We were also looking at the regulatory process with the province and working on a partnership with the BC Wildfire Service that's been identified as a high priority within the province of BC to increase not only prescribed burning, but increase First Nations knowledge into the burn plan process. So we are working in agreement with them now. So the technical data has been collected, the interviews analyzed, and the burn plans have been developed. Just to give you an area, British Columbia, Kamloops, BC, in what we call the southern interior is where our office is based. Unisatine is up in the Chilcotin. Caribou, Shack, and Wheaston are in the fairly dry sites of the province. BC is quite unique, where you can go from semi-desert-like conditions, grasslands, cactus, sagebrush, up into subalpine tour levels, where you get a multiple tree species and a wide variety in elevation changes. Yeah, it's quite a unique province in multiple topography and elevation changes. You could be skiing up in one area and swimming in another, and probably in May and June. So the Wheaston band is, we have smaller reserve than most parts of the back east in Canada. Some of our populations range from 50 to maybe 1,000 at the highest, and some of our reserve lands are smaller, and Wheaston isn't too bad, 4,000 hectares. I have to apologize. I think that's roughly, you'd multiply 2.5 by that to get acres. I forgot all that stuff from high school, so I don't know the conversion. But we did start with acres, and we converted over to hectares. Again, 464 registered band members in Wheaston. And some of the areas that we're looking at, Orchard Springs, 50 homes, other structures, the central part of the community, their administration office. They have a volunteer fire department, and they have over 30 other homes surrounding in the main village. The Shaken Band is even smaller. They're part of the Nakaplamac Nation. They're 40 kilometers west of Merritt. They're probably about hour and a half, 2 hours between Shacken and Bridge River. Again, 3,800 hectares, 133 registered band members, 69 living on reserve. So yeah, some of our communities are quite small. I think the biggest in the Secwepemc Nation, where I'm from, they have about 13 to 1,500 registered members. And I know when you go around Saskatchewan and some of those other eastern communities, they're quite large. This is the Shacken community, very dry, open range, bunch grass, ponderosa pine and sagebrush. Quite a small community off to the left, around 14 Mile. That's the main community. And this Unistine up in the Caribou-Chilcotin area, they reached a title case a few years back, one of the first in BC, if not Canada, that holds title to their lands. 105 kilometers west of Williams Lake, and they're severely impacted by the wildfires going back to 2010. I think they're quite tired of getting evacuated almost on an annual basis. The Chilcotin actually took a stand 2017, and they never left the community. They declared they're going to stay and fight the fires, and they did so quite effectively. So again, a smaller community, 232 on reserve, 486 registered. This is a copy of our burn plan map for the community. So yeah, like I mentioned, some of the existing forest structure, it's very open, and at least in these sites, south-facing slopes, sagebrush, bunch grass, Saskatoon, Supalali, immature ponderosa pine, and Douglas fir. Douglas fir and ponderosa pine are somewhat fire resistant, so historically when fires have come through, they'd be very good for that type of activity as they remain due to the thickness of the bark. So yeah, with the changes that brought in a lot of thick, dense stands, understory, that created some problems. And then also with the mountain pine beetle infestation that went through the province was a huge impact to the stands in BC as well. I think there'd be thousands and thousands and miles of forest that would be just totally, they'd go from red to gray, dead stands. And that created a significant wildfire risk to the province. And it's now that's kind of went through, it's impacting the available timber supply for the province. So yeah, it's really increased the fuel loading in our province, where when the fires do come in, they're fairly severe, hot, intense. I mentioned or heard someone this morning, when fire is good, but if it's too intense and it gets too deep into the soils, and it can do a lot of damage, and that's kind of what's happening right now. My community went through a severe fire in 2003, right through the whole valley, and you can drive through the valley, and it's still not regenerating the way it should, just due to the impact of the intensity of the fire. Not sure how my timing is. It's going to seem like I'm going fast. So it's just some basic information. I think I'm going to skip through some of I want to show a couple of video clips of our actual fire that we did. Again, some of the stands, how dry they are. This is one of the pictures of the prescribed burn we did at Bridge River. This was done in the last week of March. Some of the fuel treatments they do, probably have to do a lot more of these prior to a prescribed burn due to the density of the sites. Fire Smart Canada has a recognition program that a lot of our community buys into. I believe it's Firewise in the States. Again, just some of the fuel treatments, some of the crews. Someone also mentioned the crews in these areas. The one good thing about the provincial crews is they are turning their efforts from suppression to prevention, so they have provincial crews that will go out and do these activities as well. And again, some of the photos from the fire that we did at Bridge River, right up to the houses and going out to the forest landscape. A lot of deep, thick grass. I think some of them were saying, unfortunately, I was away that week, but the grass was probably waist high. It was quite deep in some of these locations. Good example of the red shirts are the BC Wildfire Service crews, and the others are the First Nations crews. A lot of the wildfire crews are composed of First Nations in the communities. There's a drone. We had a film being taken, and we might see a portion of one today. That's the Bridge River site. Unfortunately, they had to stop it after probably the first day due to the wind. And I'm not sure how to click on that. One of the vid.
But the apple spring, we used to go up there and hunt annually, and up at the same places that our people used to go up there springtime and burn the mountain to allow us to keep going up there to hunt. Because if it became too forested, it wouldn't be as good utilizing that mountain as a hunting area. So we kept on going up there to burn them. And it was a spring job. You gotta get up there before it dries up too much. It's probably the same with all our areas where we picked our raspberries and blueberries and huckleberries. Go in those areas, burn them down and let them regrow.
It's one of the elders from the Wheaston community. Their photo. This one should be. It's one of the sections of the Bridge River burn. Again, the unit crew from the province and the community members partnered up. The BC Wildfire Service came with quite a bit of resources for the community. You see a lot of the trees in the background are pruned. They do a lot of wildfire prevention, field treatments adjacent to all the homes around the communities. Bridge River has been fairly aggressive in doing that work. Their whole community is almost fuel treated. Now they're going back with plans to burn those sites. Unfortunately, this is the one they had to stop due to the wind. Infograph we borrowed from Eastern Canada, just explaining the process that we did to conduct these burns. If you look on our website, you can see all these in more detail. The Shakin Band, they're also Fire Smart recognized. They were impacted by a fire in 2018. Again, these are just some of the photos from the burn they did in March. The study area. I'm not sure if we got much time left, but I think we might see a bit of a video after this. I'm not sure. Yeah, if there's time. So I think I'll skip through a couple of the interviews and another the infographs. A couple of elders from Unisatine. Again, these infographs are pretty popular back east, and they have somebody in the audience taking notes, and they draw up pictures during the event. So yeah, the next steps, we want to just encourage and utilize this as a model and work with the province of BC and our First Nations communities to bring this type of work back into the landscape. There's some capacity issues around the training and experience and the resources. As much as we would like to think a lot of this knowledge has been lost, because the fact is that they haven't done it historically for quite a few years. So we're just trying to bring it back into more of our management programs with the province. And then utilize this burn plan and increase the participation with the province, industry, and the First Nations communities. So